Okay, so where we left off last, we ended up creating a entity model, and we also ended up creating again what would amount to a business layer where we were generating our contacts. So if we were to look at this, and I actually took out the code where we populated the contacts because I'm going to redo this and generate a bunch of random names, which will be a little bit more realistic. But again, all we really did here is we're storing instead of having a database, we're accessing this internal property called data. And if it's not in the cache, we're going to create it, and we're going to put it in the cache, and we're going to end up, returning that data from the cache. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to generate some random values. We're going to do a little bit of styling with some CSS, and the other thing that we'll end up doing is we'll end up doing some paging, and we'll end up taking advantage of some model binding. And then in the next video, we'll end up finishing things up with our inserting, editing, and deleting. And after that, we'll end up getting into how we could end up using jQuery to make the application more responsive. So let's start out. I'm going to actually be copying and pasting some code in because this is not something I really want to just type out. What I'm really attempting to do here is to generate some random names that we can end up putting in this list. So I'm going to copy and paste some stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about what's going on. Frankly, I'm not even sure that this stuff is totally random, but it'll be sort of interesting because when we go in and we end up doing our filtering by name, we'll find that out. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a seed for a random value. So what this is supposed to end up giving me is a random value. And again, I'm not really an expert on this. I could probably read up on it a little bit, but one of the things that I'm doing here is every time I call this, I have this variable called seed, starting out with a random number, which is the current number of milliseconds in the current date object, and I'm incrementing that seed when I end up calling this method. This part should be pretty self-explanatory. If I call getLetter and I pass in true, that means I'm looking for a vowel, in which case the string that I'm going to be getting a value from is going to be A-E-I-O-U. Otherwise, I'm going to end up using this string that doesn't have any values, and what I'm going to do is return letters, and the index that I'm going to use is going to be a random number between 0 and the length of the string -1. I'm pretty sure that is correct. I might want to double check that. Maybe that's why I'm not getting as random numbers as I think I'm getting. Because if I ended up going to the length of the string, so in the case of a vowel, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It might actually be the length of the string is what I'm looking for. All right, I'm going to try that out. I'm going to see if that gives me some more random values, which would kind of make sense, but we'll see how that works. But in any event, I'm basically just grabbing a value from this string to get a random letter, and I have another method, and this is going to generate a word. This is actually the kind of thing where, again, I don't know if we're going to end up getting into it in this class, but the more advanced MVC class, we should cover it, which is unit testing. Something like this would actually work out really well for unit testing. Sometimes it's tough to unit test parts of a web application, but something like this would be very easy to do. What I have here is I have a getWord method, and also notice that both these methods are private. They're not being used outside of this class. And eventually, one thing that would probably make sense is to put these in another class that you could reuse. Again, assuming that it worked out, and it might be something like random generator or something like that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pass in a length, and as long as I'm going to start out with an empty word. I'm going to set vowel to false. So I'm just going to alternate between having a vowel. If I have first time through, I'm going to get a consonant, and the next time through, I'm basically just going to flip this variable, and I'm going to end up getting a vowel. So every time that I go through here, I'm going to say word plus get letter, and whatever this Boolean value is, and I'm going to end up returning the word. You could also call this get name, because that's actually how I'm calling it. And what I'm going to do here, so before we were basically hard coding the contacts that we have here. And what I'm going to do now is, let's see what I have here. And the only thing that's going to make this just even moderately complicated is I want to avoid generating a duplicate email address. Very, very, well, it shouldn't be that likely that I end up doing that, but the names are not that long, and if I do have, I'm assuming that my database is going to have a constraint on it for that. Let's see if I'm pasting in the right thing here. Okay, so let's actually take a look at this. So basically everything that's in here is what I'm going to do is if I'm going to look in my cache, I'm going to see if I can find a list of contacts. Again, this is totally legitimate. If it turns out that that there's a null value in the cache, this variable contacts is going to be null. And what I'm going to do here is that if it's null, I'm going to create this list. Now, I'm not going to actually do 5,000. Let me do like 500. And if I actually wanted to get 500, let me see less than or equal to. And what I'm doing is just calling my method getWord. And what this should be doing, if it's working, is to give me a first name that's going to be between 4 and 7 characters, 4 or greater, less than 7, right? Because next basically says this is going to be a random number, which is going to be 4 or greater, but it's going to be less than 7. And this is going to be give me a random number, 5 or greater, right, which is less than 9. So this should be 5 to 8 characters. This should be 4 to 6 characters. And what I'm doing here is I'm getting an email address. I'm actually just doing the same domain here, just the first name, last name at gmail.com. And what I'm doing here is using a link. So again, this is really a powerful tool. And what I'm doing is just providing a predicate or a lambda expression. And the way that this works, you could count, and you could say, what do you want to count? And what I want to count is I want to get the contacts where the email is equal to the email that I have here. And if there is an email that exists in the system, which is the same as the one that I generated, I'm just going to tag on that count. So, if it turns at most, it should be, well, I guess, how this guy, I don't expect to really have any duplicate email addresses, but I think in essence, really what this should end up doing is that if the email exists, it's just going to put a 1 on the end of it. I guess if this email ends up getting generated again, it's going to have a 2 on the end of it, and so on and so forth. It'd be interesting to see if when that would actually happen. I guess the shorter the names, the more likely that's going to happen. So after I end up doing that, now I have a valid first name, a last name, and an email address. My ID is just going to be the count. And let me actually, instead of doing count, I really don't want to have an ID of 0 because that could screw me up later on. What I can do here is, which is probably totally legit, is to just say the ID is equal to I. So I've got, looping over this, and I'm populating a contact every time I loop over this. And again, if you just want to maybe it's even a little bit clearer here. If I go in, there's nothing that prevents you from indenting. Right, so this is the contact that's getting added finally, right? And once I'm done, looping over this loop, then I'm going to end up putting it in the cache, and I'm going to return this variable contacts. So this should actually work. Let's see if this gives us some random random strings, and if we say debug, start without debugging, and we click on contact, and we end up getting some weird strings here, but that's all right. We have a lot of values to work with, and this will end up being kind of interesting. We'll see if actually this worked out in terms of generating some random values. The other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to just do a little styling so people are comfortable with it, to put a menu instead of having our links up here like this, to put a menu in so it looks a little bit better. And I actually was playing around with some code in order to do that. Let's do a couple things here. So I'm going to go into my CSS file. And one thing that's also, I don't know if we ended up going over this yet, but the reason why you have a CSS file that's included, it's not magic. It's that when you end up, even when you create a blank site, the layout page gets created. And what you end up getting here is the CSS gets included. One thing that happens here, it's actually worth noting, is that when you have content that's on the site, you want to make sure that the path to this file is correct. Now, in order to do that, this is basically in the root directory, of the application /content/site.css. But just to make sure that you have the right URL, if you do url.content, it'll automatically put in the correct path. That's something that could be pretty useful. We'll end up seeing that. We'll look at the source code to see what that ends up outputting. It's also important to note that the way that MVC works is you could think to yourself, if everything is based on routing, how come it's not how come it's not trying to look in the content controller and a site action, or site.css action, or however you want to think about it. And the way that this works is that if there's a file that actually exists on the system, it's not going to go through MVC. It'll basically just the browser will the server will end up returning that file, which in this case is the style sheet. So that ends up happening with with any file that exists on the system, any images or that sort of thing. So let's actually just do a little styling here. We're going to go into our style sheet. So let me open up the Solution Explorer. There's a bunch of styles that are here already. I'm not going to mess around with these too much. I'm going to change one thing here. Let's just change the background color. I'm going to make it gray. I'll show you why in a little bit. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some styles in here for a menu. So if we end up going to our layout page, we've got this UL, which is really functioning as our menu. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give this a class of menu. And we might even be able to reuse this when we do our paging as well. And I'm going to actually go in here and put a BR clear all, because this is what I'm going to do with this menu is instead of it being stacked vertically, I'm going to end up stacking it horizontally. So let me actually go and put these other styles in, and we'll take a look at them. Okay. So here's some CSS for our menus. And the other thing I should also point out, I'm going to save this when I'm done, and I'll give it the same the application the same name as the title for this video, or at least I'll let you know the name, and I'll upload it on my server so you can download it. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is that for the class menu, I'm going to say list style type is none. I'm going to take out the padding and the margin. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say for each list item, I'm going to specify the font size. What I'm doing here is using a little bit of CSS3. I'm not positive that this is going to work in all browsers, but I think this has a fair amount of support, and it doesn't break anything if it doesn't. It's kind of interesting. What you can do is you can create a shadow on a letter. And so basically it ends up working with the X and Y axis. So what it ends up doing is basically it's pretty much saying, hey, look, I'm going to create a shadow of the letter, and I'm going to move it a little bit to the left and a little bit up. So it takes that same letter and it moves it over, it blurs it a little bit, and you can specify the color for that shadow. So that's kind of interesting, and I'm going to do that for each of the list items. I'm going to float this to the left. I'm going to give it a padding of 3 pixels. I'm going to give it a little bit of a margin so these things aren't stacked on top of each other. I'm also going to do a little border radius so that the left and the right borders are going to be 5 pixels, but the bottom ones are going to be 0 because I'm going to have this sitting on top of a content area. I'm going to give it a different font family. I'm going to give it a font weight of bold. The other thing that I'm going to do is that if the list item happens to be selected, meaning that's the page that you're on, and we're going to have to do a little bit of work eventually to get that to work, I'm going to say that so here we have UL menu. If the list item, 2 situations. If I hover over the list item, okay, or if it's selected. And what I'm going to do now, I'm doing the shadow, but instead of having the shadow go, move to the left and up, it's going to move a little bit to the right and down, because that's just the way that the coordinate system is. It's the when you move to the when you have a positive value here, you move a little bit to the right. When you have a positive value here, you move down. So going this way and down is would be a positive value here, positive value here. Going this way and up would be a negative value here and a negative value here. And the only other thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, hey, look, if the list item is selected, and for now we'll just make the home selected, then I'm going to say the background color is going to be white. And the only other thing that I'm going to do here is that for the links themselves, I'm going to give them a little bit of a blue color, so it doesn't have the standard color, and I'm going to just give it some text decoration. So if I save this, save everything here. Now again, there's nothing that really needs to be rebuilt. I could go over here and click on contact, and let's see if it's caching my style sheet. Yeah, so this looks a little bit better. One thing that I could also do here is I'm going to move the well, we'll end up moving the page title a little bit, perhaps. We'll have to figure that one out. But what I want to do is I want to take my content area, which is going to be here in the layout, and I'm going to wrap this whole thing in a div, and I'm going to say div ID equals content. Okay. I'm going to put this here, and the only thing that I'm going to do here, this is where basically my pages that are using this layout page or master page, this is where the content is going to wind up. And what I'm actually going to do in my style sheet is just make the content area I'm just going to give it a background color of white. Okay, let me save this. And let's actually see, none of these are going to be selected at the moment. Let's just, we'll end up fixing this a little bit later on, but just to see how this would work, let's actually do this. We'll make our contact selected. And again, we'll end up figuring this out. So the last overload, one of the overloads that you can use for an action link is to put some HTML attributes. Now, if you want to use, you can't use class here because class is a reserved word. So if we actually want to class this link, and actually, you know what I'm doing? If you did want to class that link, I'm actually not going to need to do this right now, but you could do that by doing something like that. Now I'm realizing really what we want to class is the list item, right? Because if you look at the style sheet, you'll see that the one that's selected is the list item that has a class of selected. And if we save this, go back here and reload this page, we get something like that. And I think there's a little bit of an issue here with the line break that we'll come back and fix. I think maybe even if we ended up going in here, maybe I could remove this and do a clear all somewhere else. I'm not positive. Let's see. There's some kind of margin that's there, or yeah, that doesn't quite look right. I think there's a way that we could resolve that. But I'm going to put this back in. BR. But I'm going to definitely want to get rid of that space. I tested this out before. I don't recall seeing that, but we'll get that straightened out. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to take a look at having. We took a look at doing some paging in the application, and let's see. We've been going here for about 20 minutes now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to save this up, and when we start the next one, we'll actually quickly get into the paging. Again, update, editing, and deleting. We're going to do that fairly quickly, and then we'll end up getting into the jQuery. All right. So be back in a little bit.